Okay, so now let's go ahead and go through the next part, which is trying to understand how do we deal with a function that does not have a one-to-one function, which means right now we don't have an inverse of this particular function because it is a parabola that looks like this. Remember that if I draw a horizontal line, it will go through 2 points, so we don't have an inverse. But let's go ahead and try to figure out what the inverse is anyway, and then I'll explain how to be able to solve these types of problems. But first off, we have f of x equals x squared plus 2x plus 4. So this is our original equation. We're going to change this to y. That's the only difference. We're then going to substitute all the y's for x's and all the x's for y's. Notice now we have two y's here. So then we get x. So now I have to get the y's all by themselves. So now I subtract 4. So I subtract 4 from each side, get x minus 4 equals y squared plus 2y. I then am going to add 1 to both sides. Now, why am I adding 1 to both sides? Because I want to complete the square. Now, to complete the square, if you recall, I take half of 2, which is 1, and I square it. Okay, so I take half of 2, which is 1, so I have y squared plus 2y. So remember, we're going through these steps now in this particular case, and I'll kind of walk through them. I guess I should have done it on separate paper anyway, so let me do that. 2y plus 4. I then subtract 4 from both sides. So I get y squared plus 2y. I look at the middle term, which is the y term. I take half of it, and I square it. I take half of it, sorry. It's 2 over 2, which is half of it. 2 over 2 is 1. 1 squared is 1. So we have 1 there. So what does that mean? That means that I add 1 to both sides. So I add 1 there, and I add 1 over here. So I have x minus 4 plus 1, which is x minus 3, equals this y squared plus 2y plus 1. Notice, of course, inside of here, this is really just 1 squared. So therefore, we have y plus 1 squared. This one comes from here. This one goes over here. Notice they are different ones. They are different numbers. So we take a look at which number is which and how we actually put that out there. So now I have this. Now I take the square root of both sides. So if I take the square root of both sides, this is why we learned all that square root stuff at the beginning. I have the square root of x minus 3. When I take the square root, I have to remember to put the plus or minus. That equals y plus 1. I then am going to subtract 1 from both sides. So I get negative 1 plus or minus the square root of x minus 3. So that would be my y value. So that would be my y value for that one. So notice in this case, they did the exact same thing. So I wanted you to see all those steps and see why they did it. So plus or minus here, I have minus 1 plus or minus the square root of x minus 3. However, we have to restrict the domain so that it becomes a function. So we have to figure out, okay, right now, this fails the horizontal line test. So f of negative 1 is not a function. So you'll notice in this case that if I were to draw it this way, this would be my function here. Of course, this is no longer a function because it would not pass the vertical line test. So this doesn't pass the horizontal line test. This one doesn't pass the vertical line test. So we're going to restrict the domain so that in this case, for the first one, we're going to stop it right here. So we're either going to go from negative infinity on the x all the way to negative 1, or we're going to go from negative 1 all the way to positive infinity. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to cut this parabola in half. So to do that, what I have is I have my parabola. Don't have a whole lot of room, so I'm going to come up here. So I have my parabola there. So you'll notice that my parabola in this case is at negative 1, positive 3. So that is where the vertex is, at negative 1, positive 3. What does that mean? That means my inverse has to be, so this point right here is negative 1, positive 3. So for my inverse, I have to be at 3, negative 1. So that would be 1, 2, 3, negative 1. So that's where the vertex would be for that one. So if I pick one side of the parabola, let's say I pick this side of the parabola, then it would be this side of the parabola that we're looking at. Because remember that I have my mirror here, and it's mirroring over that side there. So you can kind of see what's happening there. So if I go from negative infinity to -1, then on the other side, you'll notice in this particular case on my this is my domain, by the way, on my range, I should be going from -1 to negative infinity. Notice that, of course, the values reverse, and we can see what's kind of happening in that particular case. So now that becomes the picture of what it should look like if we are restricting that domain. So we can kind of see what's happening in this particular type of graph. We're going to do our a word problem from the homework. I'm not going to give you a bunch of these. I just want you to see how it works and be able to use these. I'm going to do that in the next video.